talk about in this room is general in nature. It's very hard to get specific with a specific association, so just keep that in mind. You may have specific circumstances that don't exactly line up with the way I say things, but I'm trying to make our conversation so that the bulk of the room gets an understanding of what we're talking about. And again, we always, top of the line, we talk about the big picture. That's something really important for all the board members to remember, is that we're not here with the minutia. We're really here for the bigger picture. We're a nonprofit corporation, and we're a mutual benefit for the benefit of all those involved in the corporation. And we exist because the state of California mandates that we have an association for the kind of complex that we have. So that's really where we're at. And in the case of maintenance, the real mandate that all board members have is to preserve and enhance the value of the asset. We just have to keep that in mind because that's really the function of the board. You may have thought your function was to go around and look for violations and fine people and do all that stuff, and truly that's a secondary piece that comes with the package. The real package is keep working on making your community a better place to live, a place that homeowners can really enjoy, and the truth is it doesn't take a lot of effort to do that. Okay. As we talk about maintenance, the first thing on the list is to find out where do you find all the things that need to be maintained? How do I find out what my association needs specifically? And there's a couple of ways that happens. And I've listed them here for you on the agenda. The first place, of course, is you look to the CC&Rs. Typically, the CC&Rs will say something about what the association is common area property and what is individual separate interest. Obviously, there's other documents that clearly define all of that. But in the newer CC&Rs that come out, there's a maintenance matrix. I gave you all a sample of a maintenance matrix in case you haven't seen one. These are great documents. I'll get into that deeper in just a second. And then the other item that you look to is the reserve study. You want to know what needs to be maintained? That's the places you go. Your CC&Rs, the maintenance matrix, the reserve study, and we'll talk shortly about how to maintain it. Let's turn to the maintenance matrix and recognize what this actually says to everybody. In the example, the first page on this is the residential unit. It talks about the painting of the exterior of the front door. Who would have thought you want to break it down to that simple piece? But how many of you have had homeowners who call you and say, I want my front door painted, or I want my this done? And they don't know if it's their responsibility or your responsibility, and you end up fighting the battle of who's responsible for what. A maintenance matrix, something like this document here, helps resolve those issues. The newer CC&Rs are coming out with a maintenance matrix. If your CC&Rs don't have it, you should consult with your attorney to get one made up. Certainly, those boards that like to feel like they're more self-managed can do this kind of thing themselves, but when you get it blessed by the attorney, then it has some teeth in it. If it's just something you've made up and passed out to people and doesn't necessarily comply with your governing documents, you could find yourself in trouble. So I do recommend you not just haphazardly make one up. I think you ought to have it blessed by the attorney, and for a certain fee, of course, the attorney will be glad to do it for you. And I don't think that fee is very small, but it's well worth having it. It saves the associations so much money. You know, one example that came to my attention earlier today was a situation where a homeowner had a drain backup in their unit. And on their own, they apparently went out and got the camera and fished down and went down in the drain system and found out that the whole problem was tree roots. And then he came back to the HOA and said, you guys maintain the trees, must be your problem. And of course, we know that we don't actually maintain the root system of the trees, nor do we actually go in underground and maintain the drain systems. We don't have a look at that every year or so. There are some circumstances where the truth is it is beyond our control. We really don't have control of how the roots grow and all of that sort of thing. But in other circumstances, who's responsible for that drain line? Who's responsible for that water break on that particular piece of pipe, or the window, or the door, or the stucco, or the roofs? All that could be identified on such an item as this, known as the maintenance matrix. As we go into looking at how to discover what you're maintaining, I think lots of those things are fairly obvious, aren't they? If you've got tennis courts, the association maintains them. If you have streets, the association maintains them. A lot of times associations maintain all of the yards, but in many associations, the individual maintains the yards. And the list goes on and on. We had a case one time where the association maintained the guardrails on a multi-story building, and the homeowner was responsible for making sure it got done. And so the association had in their documents, the guardrails shall be painted every 5 years. These were wrought iron guardrails, so they had to be kept up in good shape. And they were subject to peeling and rusting and those kinds of things. And so they had a special document established that said, if the homeowner calls and says, my guardrail needs painting, then the maintenance department would look at it and say, well, when was it last painted? They documented all that and found out that it was painted in the last 3 years. Oh, well, it's not due to be painted for 5 years. What's the solution? The homeowner says it needs painting now. It's in bad shape. The solution was they wrote up their matrix to say that if it's been longer than 5 years, paint it now. No questions asked. Management's authorized to go ahead and spend the money to get it painted. If it's been between 3 and 5 years, the manager can make the decision on his own, go up and look at it, determine, yep, it needs painting, and get it painted. And if it's less than 3 years since it's been painted, then it takes a board member to step on it also and look at it and say, is this homeowner being a little bit overreactive, or was the paint job really just a bad job and in fact it needs it anyway? They set their establishment up by a hierarchy of timing so that they could have a clear understanding of how to make the decision. And that's something important for all the maintenance functions you take on. How do you make the decision of what's going to get maintained? And that's what the boards are supposed to do. You do that with the advice of experts, but making those decisions is part of what you want to do. And certainly once you've made decisions on things, documenting it so you have a clear trail for future incidents of the same type makes it easy for the next board coming down the line. When we look at what are you supposed to do in the order of what gets maintained, you want to look at various different pieces that help you figure that out. Obviously, if you have equipment like air conditioning equipment, things like that, then you have installation manuals or maintenance manuals that you can look to that describe how the maintenance is supposed to get done. I don't think there's a manual on how to grow grass necessarily, although there's probably one someplace, or how to paint your building. So I guess in those cases, we might have to rely on the advice of experts. If you've got a maintenance issue, you want to figure out what is the best way to maintain our who's it, what's it, the painting on the building. Then go to a painting company or a paint manufacturer and ask them, what's your recommendation here? And they'll tell you what it is. You can look to your reserve study because the reserve analyst has probably already done that, and he's figured out that yes, the building gets painted every 10 years, and then the painting supplier can ask for can provide the quality of paint requirements and those kinds of things, and you can write that up into a policy manual so your community has a way of determining how does the maintenance get done. I recommend that wherever possible, one prepares a maintenance manual. When you have, especially if you have a complex situation, you ought to have some kind of documents that the board sanctions that says this is how we're going to do business when it comes to maintenance of the property. A policy for the various functions can be designed. So looking at a landscape plan or a policy for each portion, one might want to have a policy that says our landscape will be maintained such that flowers get changed out twice a year, once in the spring or just before summer, and once in the fall just before winter, and our lawns will get mowed every week or every 10 days or whatever your association's policy is. And actually write that up as a policy, because when you as a board take the time and effort to design how do we want the maintenance to function, isn't it nice to have something you can pass on to the next board coming down the line that says, here's how we've established things get done. It makes life so much easier on future boards. Pool maintenance. Now, obviously, in most cases, you rely on your landscaper to maintain the lawn, and if you're like typical boards, you look to the landscaper and say, just get it done. I'll take your bill at the end of the month, and you hope he does it right. In some boards, you have a landscape committee who's out there checking every weed and checking every flower to make sure they all look good. I'm not sure I recommend that be the case, but certainly you want to have some oversight to your contractors. In pool maintenance, you pretty much leave it all up to the pool guy because he knows how the chemical balance is supposed to be and how often he ought to come. But your contract with him identifies, does he come twice a week or 3 times a week, or does he come every day? And how is he going to do that? Is he going to brush the pool down and do that, what do they call that, sweep and run, you know, where the pool guy's in there for 3 seconds and does a quick job and out the way he goes? Or is he supposed to vacuum the pool on a regular basis? Is he supposed to clean the filters on a regular basis? If you have that stuff documented and you make that part of the agreement with the pool man, what a blessing that is, because it makes things run much smoother. The same thing applies to your street maintenance, your roof maintenance. Speaking of roof maintenance, I gave most of you have a copy of this nice color photograph in your package there. Those that don't have it, somebody share it with somebody who doesn't have it. I ran out of the paper and didn't realize I didn't print quite enough copies of this. It's meant to be serious and funny at the same time. A roof maintenance company took a picture of a very bad condition roof that was just full of debris. But people often ask the question, why do I have to do roof maintenance? My roof guy comes by every 5 or 10 years and does what he's going to do. What's the big deal here? Well, this kind of debris collecting on a flat portion of a roof can be extremely hazardous to the roof itself. It will help cause leaks to occur. Having a roof maintenance program is an excellent idea for helping prevent leaks, but more than that, having a program of maintenance in place will help you when the lawsuit comes from the homeowner who had the leak, who's blaming you for not doing anything about the leak. You can come back and say, we have a maintenance program in place and here's how we do things. Your insurance company is going to look at that and say, they've done all they can do to maintain the roof. This must be one of those accidental things, and the insurance company picks up the bill. If the insurance company comes back and finds out, well, no, the last time we looked at the roof was 10 years ago. We don't look at our roofs very often. They might say, well, then you didn't do your part for the maintenance. You kind of tie that together with like your car. You know, when we talk about maintenance, all of us drive, most of us drive anyway, and we have maintenance to our car. The manufacturers told us we have to change the oil every so often, and we have to check the tire pressures and check the water in the radiator and all those kinds of things. And if they were to find that we didn't do those things on a scheduled basis, when you go in for the repair, what are they going to say? Not my problem. You didn't follow our plan for how to maintain the vehicle. Well, that's what's going to happen on our homes as well. You just look at it the same way. The fact is, a good maintenance program is preventive in nature, and it helps to let the insurance companies and other people know that you're doing the best you can to maintain it. The roofing manufacturer puts a warranty on the roof in most times, doesn't he? There's sometimes a 10-year warranty or some such thing as that. And isn't it nice if they can come back after you pointed out a leak to them and you're saying this is covered by our warranty here, they can say, well, you didn't maintain it. And you can say, oh no, yes we did. Here we have the documentation right here of all the times we went up on the roof and we performed maintenance. It just really helps make sure things get done in a way that really works.
Excuse me, one thing to be aware of too is that most homeowners, and we're talking primarily condominiums, have an HO6 policy and they have a rider on that for their personal contents inside. So maybe they have a baby grand piano that's worth thousands of dollars. Well, the association doesn't have an insurable interest in that. So you can't get insurance on that baby grand piano. Not only that, you don't know what's inside. So the duty to maintain and do as Steve says and make sure you get up on that roof is something that later on you can show that says, we maintain our necessary responsibility, which is the roof. The homeowner needs to purchase the additional rider for their baby grand piano. Without that, you're going to be in small claims court or civil court with a duty to maintain that you breached, and now you may have to come out of pocket for whatever damages that individual suffers. So that's the real importance in that maintenance obligation.
The grand piano was a great example. My example was more on the order of a nice brand new plasma television set. You know, any piece of furniture or personal property that they have inside and that leak occurs, there's going to be a battle going on as to who's going to take care of that because of the circumstances on how the roof is maintained, who has responsibilities. Again, if that kind of information was delineated in a maintenance matrix so that everybody understood that the roof may leak, but everything that's damaged inside that roof leak is my responsibility unless I can prove negligence on the association. And that's where the issue really comes in. As you look to the insurance policy of your individual homeowner's unit, you want to be sure that it comes right up against the association's insurance policy. There's no gap in between that the either insurance company can use as the place to fall through the cracks. They're going to say, gee, it's not covered. If this one says it's not covered and this one says it's not covered, that means you got a gap someplace in between. It's really important that your homeowners understand that they need to have a policy that dovetails in and fits properly with the association's policy so that there is no gap there. When it comes to things like repairs due to roof leaks or plumbing leaks or things like that, it also is important to recognize the other factor, which is the maintenance side of things. I note in the automobile example that there is a schedule of maintenance you do on your car, and in fact, you know what that cost is. If you don't know what it is, you'll be surprised when you get there because it's going up all the time. All the maintenance you plan for has to be budgeted for. You have to consider that. And as often as we like to keep our maintenance fees as low as we possibly can, you do not want to do that at the expense of not getting the maintenance done that needs to be done on the components of the association, because the mandate still stands. We're to preserve and enhance the value of the assets. The real thing when looking at what you want to do with the maintenance and how it's going to get done and when it should get done might fall to the reserve study, a good place to look and see about things getting done. The fact is that the reserve study is a listing of all the association's components, and I said the word all in that sentence. It's really important. You may not set aside reserve funds for those items that have a useful life over 30 years because the Civil Code allows you to drop those off the list. But the list of them still needs to be there because even though they have a useful life remaining of over 30 years, you still need to maintain them today. They need to be maintained on an ongoing basis, and the reserve study will help you see what those components are, and then the expert in the field can help you determine what kind of maintenance should you be doing to lengthen the life of that component. I talked about the policies that I'd love to have you develop. They're not easy to do. It's not something you can go to your manager and say, hey, develop a policy for me, would you please? Because obviously that's not something that's in the average management contract. But working with a committee of your association, along with the contractors that know about these items, your board members could actually put together a nice draft of policies regarding how you're going to maintain things. The biggest benefit you'll have from that is now it's documented in such a way that it's clear for the future boards coming on. What we've seen with those boards that have been around for years and have changes over the years, they walk into our office and you say, well, how is this maintained? And they shrug their shoulders. I don't know. They honestly don't know, and it's true, and it's not like it's their fault they don't know. It's not written down anyplace, and most new board members are finding out by just listening to the scuttlebutt out there. Wouldn't it be nice to have it nice and clearly documented? It is an energy-consuming, time-consuming item, but it really will help your association out if you can find a way to get that to happen. Now, when you talk about getting the maintenance done, I don't think I'm asking anybody to form a committee to go out and do the maintenance. You don't have a committee that goes out and mows the lawns. You don't have committees that go out and paint the buildings for you. You hire contractors to do that. And the same thing applies with all of your maintenance. You really need to have a known contractor that you trust, that you can rely on to get the work done, and have a relationship with them so that they will get the work done when it needs to get done, that you can give them a schedule of maintenance. Let's take the tennis courts as the example. You want to have a housekeeping type service bureau come in and wash down the tennis courts on a regular basis. You may want to have a tennis court type company looking at the tennis nets and looking at the paint on the surface to see that it's all being maintained properly. There are things like that that you can do. It's the same thing in the pool. You're expecting your pool maintenance person to look at the pumps and the filters and make sure proper things are getting done. And you rely on those contractors to do it. If you have a contract with a company, you need to have a contract. You need to have a written document of expectations. Here's what we expect the contractor to do, and here's what the contractor expects the association to do in return. Most of the time on this side, it's pay the bill. On this side, it's a list of duties to be done to make sure the maintenance gets done to the item. The fact is that most of those contracts have a lot of boilerplate minutia in there that is so boring to read because the attorney puts that in there to make sure he's got things covered. But what's really important in there is the specification of the work that's expected to be done. That's what you want to look at. A lot of the boilerplate stuff, the attorney will help you fetter out if that's going to be to your advantage or the contractor's advantage. But you want to be sure, is the work I'm expecting to get done listed in here so I can pin that down on the contractor that he's got to get that part done because it's in the documentation here. The important things with a contractor is make sure that they're licensed and insured. I would be willing to bet you that as of 3 years ago, I haven't checked it much since then, but even we as PPM had about 10% of the associations haphazardly using unlicensed, uninsured contractors. And it was board members going out and hiring their buddy to get the work done or hiring the local maintenance man they found in the yellow pages and never bothered to check him out. Probably 90% of those times, there's not a problem. The guy does a nice job, takes care of me, we're happy-go-lucky, things are fine. But when that guy causes a problem, when the tree trimmer falls out of the tree and breaks his back, when the maintenance guy causes an electrical short and burns down a building, or some such thing as that, all of a sudden you're asking yourself, I wonder if this guy has insurance. I wonder if he's going to be able to take care of the problem he created for our association. And the fact that you require your maintenance people to be licensed and insured is a great benefit to you, the association. It'll help you sleep better at night knowing that if anything was to happen, we're covered. We didn't hire somebody who just doesn't have the wherewithal to be able to have their license in place and their insurance. Does every job require a license? No. Does every job require a contractor's license? No. The laws are pretty specific on that. Jobs that are over X amount of dollars require a licensed contractor, but the smaller jobs done by handyman is perfectly fine to use a handyman. Just make sure that handyman, if he's going to do something that requires a license, that he is licensed. Make sure that he does have adequate insurance to cover you, the association, if he causes a problem. All he has to do is be driving down the street and damage somebody's car, or be doing some maintenance work and something flies off and goes and breaks a window over here. He's going to have to cover that. It might be a very minor fix, but it also might be a very major fix, like a house burning down. So you want to be sure your contractors are licensed and insured. Then, in some contracts, it's critically important that the attorney take a look at the contract. I think that, gee, it's another $300 or $400. Why do we have to spend that money? I can read the contract pretty well and see if it says all things it has to say. But what we don't get, and what the attorney does get, is this contract favorable more to the contractor or favorable more to the association? And your attorney wants it favorable more toward the association. The guy who wrote the contract up, probably the attorney for the contractor, he wants it more favorable to them. So having somebody look at a contract and verify with you that yes, this contract meets the requirements so both sides are adequately protected is a fair thing to do. And I can tell you that most of the attorneys that we currently use in associations today are trying to be balanced and fair about that because they realize we need those contractors. We don't want to write the contract in such a way that they won't even do the work anymore. So they try to write it balanced and fair. So have the attorney review certain contracts. Obviously, if you have thank you, sir. If you have a job coming up that's couple $1,000s, a really small job, and it's got a contract associated with it, and you know it's a pretty easy job to get done, just happens to be a couple $1,000s, you might be able to get by not having the attorney spend $300 or $400 analyzing the contract. If the contract's expensive, $20,000 or $30,000, it doesn't hurt to spend a few extra $100 to have the attorney review the contract, make sure we're adequately covered, that the job's going to get done appropriately. You want to consider in all your contracts the magnitude of the contract. The fact is that when you have a major project being done, and this would be maybe a one-time project like painting the buildings, all of your condominium buildings, or repaving the streets perhaps is one of them, you have a lot of detail involved in that contract. The contract might be $10,000 or $15,000, it might be $30,000 or $40,000, it might even be $150,000 depending on the scope of the contract, but what we'd have to remember to think about as an association, as a board of directors, is what else am I not thinking of here? When the painter comes up to paint the wall, he wants to be sure there's room to paint. And if there's landscaping up against that wall, somebody has to move the landscaping. Is that part of the deal? It may not be in the painter's contract to move that plant, but you may have to make arrangements to have the landscaper move that plant or trim the plant back. There's a cost involved in that. You cannot expect your landscaper to suddenly say, oh sure, I'll do all the extra trimming on all these bushes for you for free so you can have your buildings painted. He's probably going to charge you a fee for that. And then there's the oversight situation. If in fact you have a major project that requires some oversight, do you want your manager to be the oversight person and expect they're going to do that for free? Or do you want to hire a contract manager, a construction company that knows about the contract, that knows how to oversee those things? Or do you have a fellow homeowner board member who has full knowledge on how to do these things that will help oversee that project and be able to identify where things are or are not being done correctly in terms of the contract? You must consider those kinds of things in advance so that you know what the real cost of the job is. There's going to be those side costs. If you have to post notices every other day, who's posting notices? Whoever that is surely going to want to get paid to post the notices, unless by chance it's a volunteer homeowner. And it could be built into the contract of the contractor. It could be you'd rather have management take on certain responsibilities because you trust your management company. And again, it may not be built into the contract. There may be fees involved in that. All you want to know is that where we're at? And yes, have those costs as part of the project. Speaking about that, also ties it into the cost of a job when your reserve study is being looked at and looked at carefully. The fact is you may want to have those kinds of ancillary costs tacked on to the cost of the project for the reserve line item so that it's right there built into reserve studies. So when I say it's going to cost $50,000, I know that includes all my management of the project. It includes my having a landscaper do his part and having this company do their part. It's all inclusive in that cost that I've reserved for, so the money's sitting in the bucket when you're ready to go get it. That's kind of important. And I think it's important that the board of directors every year ought to be looking at their contracts just to see what they look like. The real reason for that is more to advise the new board members coming on board that here's what our contracts look like, here's the way we do business with these contractors, so that now the board members all have an understanding of how we do business. But at the same time, if a contract has an expiration date on it, you want to be sure and get it renewed so that you have a valid contract in case something comes up. And it doesn't hurt to look at contracts with the scope of work in mind. Take the management contract, one I'm really familiar with. If in the beginning we say I'm going to do these 5 items here and I identify those items, that's your management contract, and then within a couple of years the board says, well, you know, we'd also like you to take care of this issue for us, and also why don't you add on take care of this issue for us? Well, those things come at a cost. No matter what the contract is, in management they come as a cost as they do anybody else. So knowing that you've looked at the contract, oh my, this contract doesn't include those new items we put on there. We better get the contract updated so that it has the right stuff on it. What you don't want to get yourself caught up doing is going out to bid every year. There was a trend back in the 70s. It just floored me. I didn't understand it myself, and I was pretty low on the maintenance totem pole back in those days. But I can tell you, there was this talk around town where every year the associations had to go out and get 3 bids for every contract they had. And there was some trend that was the way business was done in California, so you had to do it. And that simply was never true. What was true was if you're going to go out to bid, you need to get competitive bids so that your association can have faith in the fact that you chose the right contractor. That's pretty important, especially on a major contract. If you're not going out to bid because you're satisfied with the contractor you have, all you do is negotiate the next year's deal with that contractor. It's not a requirement that you go out to bid all the time. I highly recommend that as you look at your contracts, you actually have an evaluation process with the contractor. If you've got a pool maintenance guy who's been doing your pool for years and years and years, but you know, in the back of my mind, I'm just not happy. The pool's not clean when I get down there, or the maintenance problems are constantly happening, then maybe on a periodic basis, it's nice to bring the pool contractor into the boardroom and say, let's talk about business. How are we doing? And get him to understand where your little issues are, because you'll make that contractor a better contractor. He will actually appreciate the fact that you're clearly identifying the needs that you have, and then he will have the opportunity to come back and say, well, quite frankly, that's not a function that I can do for you. Let's find somebody else that can take care of that for you if that's the case. It just, having those kinds of talks with a contractor is very good. And we like to have our managers actually come to you if they can and say, how are we doing? And I hope that when that question comes to you, you answer the question honestly. You know, I've got a problem with this issue right here, and then let's get it addressed so we can keep you satisfied. We'd love to be your management guy from now until the end of time. That would be great, you know, and we'd love to have other associations as well. And the way we're going to do that is by taking care of the ones we have, taking care of you. Don't let a problem with any one of your contractors fester. If you've got a problem with them, bring it to the attention so you can get it resolved and move forward. You're much better off fixing the problem you have than going out and changing contractors because you were dissatisfied with a small problem. I've seen that a lot too. I see it more in security companies, which is the most ridiculous one, but where they're just unhappy, they go out to bid, and they get a new set of security guards coming on duty that know nothing about their community, have no clue how to maintain the gate or how to take care of the homeowners, but the board's attitude was, they're getting too expensive, just change companies. And they don't realize there's a cost involved in the knowledge that those people have. So as you think about the maintenance of the community and contracts in general, it's important for you to recognize, even if you've had a contract for years and the cost has slowly escalated slightly, what you get as a benefit to that added cost, even though it may be just a cost of living increase, you get the knowledge that they've gained on how to take care of you and your community. That's a great benefit to have a long-term contractor with you. He also provides continuity. Take the roofing contractor who maintains your roofs. Maybe he comes out once a year, maybe twice a year, looks over your roofs and does some cleaning and maintenance of the drains in the roof and what have you. And then you go to replace the roofs. You've got a guy here that knows exactly what's been going on with those roofs. He's going to know exactly how to maintain those roofs and how to replace the roof and which ones are in the worst condition that need the replacement more than the others do. A great resource to have. So I want you to think about your contractors in a way as that they're part of our team. They're a part of us. It's not us versus them. It's actually us working together to make this association the best place it can be and to preserve and enhance the value of the assets. Once again, on special projects, the scope of the work is important. That's the biggest thing you want to look at as you're reviewing the contract. Many associations have it set out where a board member or a committee member reviews the contract and comes back and reports to the board, here's what I found, I think it's a good contract, go forward with it. That's fine to do that. I've found that it's better to have a couple of people look at it because you'll have differing opinions. Have a committee look at it, then you've got a variety of opinions. What you don't want to have is have the committee running the board, but at the same time, all committees are structured such that they simply give advice to the board. They're not telling the board what to do, they're making a recommendation. The board has the ultimate responsibility to sign on the dotted line and accept the contract. But it is nice to have more than one person's opinion so that in case something is missed, a couple of people have had a chance to talk it over and look at it. It's easy to miss things in these detailed fine print contracts. What kind of special projects, just to make sure I've touched on them all? There's painting the buildings, street maintenance, pool replastering, re-roofing. These all have a major impact both on your finances but also on the people who live there. This is a case where, you know, we're going to have a special project done. It ought to be that we advise the homeowners what we're doing. One of the things I hear a lot is the homeowner complaining because they didn't know what was going on. Why wasn't I told this was happening? And it is easy to forget, but it's very important to remember. Your homeowners are the ones you need to keep advised of what's going on. If you're planning a street maintenance project where you're going to reseal the streets and they can't get out of their garage or their parking place when the street sealing is going on, they should know that several days in advance so that they can get their car out, et cetera, et cetera. I hear it all the time. And what's really funny is the association where you know they put the notices up in the proper places, they identified the project to everybody they possibly could, there's still somebody who didn't get the notice, who just didn't find out. I honestly don't know how to solve that one. There are people who are simply not going to read your notices. One case, there was a situation where there was some, I don't know, it was a delivery of new mailbox keys or some such thing as that, and they put the notice in the newsletter, they posted notices on the mailboxes, and half a dozen people came through saying, why wasn't I told? And I scratched my head going, how do you tell them? Well, maybe in a special circumstance, it requires a specific letter to every owner. You know, in the case of changing mailbox keys out, for example, where you're changing those cluster boxes out, maybe putting a notice in every mailbox in the old mailbox a week ahead of time so they know it's coming is the way to do it. There's bound to be a way, and of course, no matter what way I pick, somebody else will have a better way, and that's fine. But I'm saying this to encourage you, communication is really important. Tell the homeowners what's going on. When it comes to maintenance, it's also important to tell the homeowners that we're maintaining things. If you have a newsletter in your community, and certainly you should, put a paragraph in there on occasion about the roof maintenance that got taken care of so that they know roof maintenance is being done. When tree trimming is scheduled, could be put in the newsletter so people know the tree trimmers will be on the property the next few days. We're having a special project taken care of, and there'll be these maintenance guys taking care of the project. Maybe it's changing out light fixtures or some such thing that doesn't really impact the homeowners too much, but they see these guys working on the building or on the project. Getting information out in advance so they know what's going on, it saves your telephone from ringing. It probably saves our telephone from ringing as well. But it makes them feel more like they're a part of the community and they know what's going on. So communications is a big deal. We do recommend that every association have a handyman they can rely on. We think that's important. There's small jobs that simply need to get taken care of. What I think is further important is that you don't wear out your handyman or your contractors constantly asking for bids for very small cost projects. They're going to replace a mailbox that got knocked over by a car or some such thing. It's going to cost several $100s. We know that. You know about what the cost is. You've probably done it before. Point to your handyman and say, get that done for me, please. And he sends you a bill and he's reasonable. If he's not reasonable, you go back and talk to him. But to go out and say, go out and get me 3 bids for replacing the mailbox on a $200 project or a $500 project might just be a little bit overkill, depending on the project. So I encourage you not to wear out your contractors. What I have seen happen is you go to contractor A, give me a bid, please. Contractor B, give me a bid, please. Contractor C, give me a bid, please. Contractor A, you got the job. Next time around, same thing, contractor A, you got the job. Next time around, same thing, same contractors, contractor A, you got the job. Contractor B and C are looking at this thing going, why am I wasting my time with these guys? They call me out here, make me go through all the process of providing a proposal to them, and then they never even talk to me after that. I think it's important that if you use a contractor to get you a proposal, that you have the courtesy to call them back, and your manager should do this for you when the manager's involved, and they should be involved in every case. Make the call that says, thank you very much, your bid wasn't accepted. We certainly appreciate the time and effort you put into this. So they feel a thank you coming back. But more than that, if it's a $200 project, that contractor could have spent $100 just getting the bid for you. He's not making any money on it because you didn't choose him anyway. What's he going to do? Thank you, but no thanks. I'm not interested in providing you a proposal anymore. Eventually, you won't have anybody to give you any bids. And then you'll have a really important project come on where you need to have the bids because our documents require it, and the contractor's saying, sorry, I don't want to work with you. Don't abuse your contractors that way. Always, if you're going to need to get bids, and then thank the contractor graciously. If you don't need a bid because you kind of have an idea what the costs are, and the contractor of choice, I already know my contractor's a good guy, he does a good job for us, his price has always been reasonable, you expect it'll be reasonable, you talk it over with him, give him the job, and don't worry about getting the bids. Now, as I speak to you about this, and I use that first person like you're going to do it yourself, chances are you're going to have your management company do it. All of your service calls ought to go through the maintenance department. Say it here at PPM. We log all of those calls. We have a computerized system that tracks all the calls so that at the end of the year, when you come in and say, how much maintenance was there in our community this week? How many repair service calls did you get? Our maintenance manager, our director of maintenance, Mark, can go in there and look it up and provide a list. Here's all the work that got done. And it makes it real nice for tracking purposes. If you have a particular problem with a particular component, and here we are again doing something with that component. What did we do the last time? I don't recall. It seems like just last week we replaced that pump motor on the pool. Why are we doing it again this week? Or whatever the issue is, Mark can look that up for you. Having a track record on that makes it nice. If as a board or a committee of the board, somebody goes out and hires the handyman and gets the job done because why should I bother Mark with this? Why should I bother my manager with this? It just bypasses a system that's helping track your calls for you. So it is highly recommended that you use the services available to you from management, call the maintenance department, and actually schedule your maintenance calls through our department. Then it's got a record of it for your benefit. It's real nice to have it that way. And your handyman kind of knows how to work with Mark, so he will know what's expected. They can have good communication between them. And then when you see a problem with a certain maintenance issue, you get a hold of Mark and let Mark know what's going on so he's aware that that handyman didn't quite cut the mustard on that particular project or whatever it is. Those are all good things to have happen. And there should be a communication with you, your fellow homeowners committee members, and Mark in our maintenance department. Okay, let's talk now about the cost of projects, and not necessarily the cost of, but where's the money coming from? This is a mistake I see happening time and time again, and I think it's important for you to think about and be aware of. You have two funds that you work with in the association. You have the operating fund and you have the reserve fund. Can anybody tell me what the purpose of the reserve fund is? Don't bother answering, I'll tell you what it is. It's to replace the component when it wears out. It's also there for the major maintenance that is scheduled, that's not an annual maintenance. So for example, you're going to paint the buildings every 5 years. That's pretty quick, let's call it 10 years. That's scheduled maintenance, and you need to have the money available in the 10-year time frame so that when the paint project comes up, the money is in the bucket, ready to go, so you can paint the buildings. If you do small paint jobs between the 10-year projects, and you use the reserve money to do that painting, you may never get the reserve built up sufficiently to cover the paint job that you scheduled for a 10-year project. It's important to use reserve funds for what they were intended to be used for, and if you have a new intent, then design that intent into your reserve plan. So when it comes to pool maintenance, you might reserve for pool replastering, and then you've got a chip in the plaster that caused a problem, so you're going to drain the pool down, fix the chip in the plaster, and fill the pool back up again. It's going to cost $500 or $600, might even cost $1,000 to get this done. Well, that's a reserve component because it's on the reserve list, replastering. Well, no, that's not replastering, that's repair of the plaster. Replastering is removing the old plaster and putting new plaster back in. And your budget for that component is based on complete replacement. If you do a patch job and take half that money away so you can patch this patch job, when you go to do the replastering job, the money's not going to be there. So it's important to think about that. Many associations do it with their roof maintenance job. They have a roof repair and they take it out of the reserve fund. I'm recommending that all of the associations have a line item in their operating budget for roof repairs. And do that out of your operating fund unless it's a roof replacement, because your reserve study is for roof replacement. Now that doesn't mean that because of your particular circumstances, we don't have roof repairs every year. We might have one roof repair every 4 years and it's not a big deal, it's several $100s, but I don't have it budgeted in my operating account because it doesn't happen every year. Well, then maybe you want a reserve line item for major roof repair, a separate number that you plug into that so that you have money collected for repairs of roofs, so that every 3 or 4 years you've got several $100s sitting there ready to repair the roofs. That's acceptable, but I don't think it's, well, I should say I think it's critically important that you recognize where the money's coming from. Just don't default to, oh, it's a roof, it's reserves. It's the pool plaster, it's reserves. It may not be. You want to be careful not to spend all the money you've been saving. It's the same thing, going back to the car analogy. If I'm going to buy a new car every 10 years, I'm going to want to start putting money away so when the car time comes, I have it. Now, few of us ever do that, but the fact is I'd like to do that. I'd like to have a reserve fund for my car. And if I take that money and make all the repairs that come from time to time, all the maintenance out of my reserve fund, when it comes time to buy the car, I won't have the money. It just all makes sense to me. I should spend what is operating out of the operating fund. If a sudden, unexpected repair comes up to a pool pump motor or to a plaster job on the pool or to a roof leak repair, if that comes up, as a sudden, unexpected thing, it's still operational. Unless when it comes up, you determine, you know what, it's time to replace that, called the pool pump motor. I have pool pump motors on my reserve sheet, and I'm calling for a repair here. The repair is going to be $300. A brand new pump motor is going to be $700. The pump's due to be replaced next year according to reserve study. Repair it, replace it a year early, replace the pump, and then adjust your reserve study accordingly. Those kinds of decisions is what the board needs to do. And again, you want to do that with the advice of experts. Have your pool man guide you on this so that you're not seen as trying to make these decisions yourself when you haven't got experience to do that. The discretion of the board in spending money. A lot of times the reserve study shows that the roof project has $100,000 allocated to it, and the plumbing project has some money allocated to it, and people seem to think that that's exacting and you can't spend money outside of the box that it's placed in. And the truth is, the board of directors, based on the Civil Code, mind you, the California Civil Code says that the board of directors has the discretion on how the money is spent in this association. And so you can step outside the box. What you want to do is just be careful how far outside the box you step, okay? If you've got money set aside for roofs and you're going to take all of that money and do it to some other project over here, you might be thinking incorrectly. But to borrow some of that money so you can get this project done, knowing you're going to refund this money back here at a later time through proper reserve funding, there's not a problem with that. And I think it is important, even in the operating budget. You budget so much money for the various categories you're going to do work in. What is the purpose of that budget? It is to have a plan on how we think we're going to spend the money. And if the plan doesn't work out perfectly, it was just a plan. And so we're going to spend more money in this category and less money in this category over here. If the bottom line is we didn't overspend the total budget, yay, we're in good shape. If you overspent the budget, then you have some news that you can use to modify the budget for next year. And so the budget is just a planning tool. Don't hold your fellow board members to the strict compliance of, I'm sorry, that's all the money we have over here. Now, let's take the other side of that. So you've got a board member who's just eager to buy all these extra flowers, and you really had the landscape committee help you and other people helped you set a budget that says we need this amount of money for flowers, but this brand new board member says, I don't care about the budget. I want more flowers over here. And well, the budget was put there to help form a guideline so that you can agree as a board, this is how we want to do business when it comes to spending our money. And as a board, you may decide to change that plan midstream, but don't let one board member take you off track saying, well, Shuey said I can spend, it's our discretion here. No, it is the board's discretion, but you do that as a board. Is there a legal limit as to how much discretion the board has? Because is there going too far? I think there's always a going too far. I'm not sure that's in the Civil Code. Again, you planned your year with a set amount of money. You collected the money from the homeowners, and now you have that much money to spend. That's all you have. If something comes up and you have to spend more than that, you're going to have a special assessment to gather those funds. You could borrow from reserves with proper documentation in place and have some extra money to take care of that issue, but that requires clear notice to all your homeowners. There's a whole lot of rigmarole that goes to borrowing money out of reserves. There's a big lot of rigmarole going over how you make a special assessment to your owners. So all those parts play a part in this. I would say that in most association documents, they have it pretty well defined that the board can spend up to 5% of the annual budget above and beyond without consulting the homeowners. When you go beyond 5%, they require notification of all your owners that we're going to take on this project. It's typically when you're going to do a capital improvement or a new capital item that was not budgeted for and you want to spend this money. You really don't want to tie the hands of your board. You want your board to be able to make decisions on a case-by-case basis because they're mandated with the responsibility of maintaining and enhancing the value of the assets, and things change. So the board today could say, we're going to limit our board. They can't spend more than $3 without having approval of all the homeowners. And then tomorrow, a $4 project comes up, and they can't do anything about it without going to a vote of the homeowners. How dumb is that? You shouldn't have anything like that in your CC&Rs or your bylaws. Give the board full discretion, and if the board doesn't do the job right, replace the board members. Get some new board members in there that understand how you want business done. And what she was saying was she's got a board member that's been identified as being the one person they can depend on that has taken the time and effort to really make it work. In her case, it's the treasurer. In your case, it might be the board president or the board secretary. It might even be a committee member who's been in maintenance for years all of his life and understands the maintenance process. You hang on to those people and treat them well because they're taking care of your association and taking good care of you in the process. Board members, one of your things that you do is you look for who's going to replace the board member going off. Somebody has to do that. Typically it's a nominating committee, but you board members have to work with that new person coming on board. You ought to be involved in the process. Who are we picking and choosing here? Are they compatible? Do they understand the values that we've set in our community? And be aware of who's coming on the board. A really important part of the process. When you're reviewing the annual contracts, is it a good idea to also review the contractor? Does he have any violations or any sanctions against him from the State Contractors Licensing Board? Is his insurance in place and his workers' compensation insurance in place? Is license still valid? All those are good things to look at, absolutely. In the case of PPM, we kind of monitor that. One of the reasons we ask that the association be listed as the additional insured by that contractor is because that flags that policy. If that policy lapses, the insurance policy lapses, they have to clearly identify to us that that's happened. The insurance company sends a notice to us, to the association who comes to our office, that you have this guy's lost his insurance. And so for us, it's kind of automatic. But as a board, yes. And you know how easy it is to go to the State Contractors License Board on the internet and dial in this guy's contractor's license number or the name of his company and find out all the news you want to know about him? It's there, and it's available to anybody. I wrote an article recently for the local Quorum magazine that talks about the need for a board retreat. What that is a time when you get together as a board and talk about these kinds of things. How's the maintenance going to get done? Where's the money going to go? How's our budget looking? And are all the contracts in place and properly taken care of? All the signatures in place, what have you? A good day-long session where you can sit down as a team and work out the projects is a great thing for a board to do. Again, there's a lot more for a board to do than worry about violations going on in the community. There's the future looking at the community. Where do we want this community to go? How do you want the maintenance taken care of? When should the roof project get done? Wouldn't it be awful to have the roof project and a street project scheduled at the same time? Well, that could happen. Your reserve study analyst out there is just plotting the years. Every 5 years, I'm going to have this street maintenance done. Every 10 years, I'm going to have the roof maintenance done. And down the road, 1 year, both of them fall the same year. And coincidentally, they happen around the same time of the same year. Holy smokes. Nobody thought about that. Well, that's what you need to think about. Be aware of what's coming up down the line. Have a schedule, a calendar of events so that you can see how are we going to get business taken care of. It's a great thing to have a time when the board can do this. The part that comes into play is, well, I can't have a secret meeting. I've got to identify to the people that we're having this meeting because I can't have more than a quorum of the board involved in any kind of discussion about things that might come up on the agenda. Well, you do it very simply. You put a notice up that says the board's going to get together and have this retreat where they're going to discuss the maintenance of the property and blah, blah, blah. Only nice thing you do is, don't slap me for saying it, but you hold the meeting far enough away that the homeowners won't come. Then you can have this nice private meeting. But you've advised them, you put it on notice to them, And I do recommend you get away from the community so you can be in a hotel room. Maybe it's a hotel room just across town where you can have a meeting room and sit down and really be able to dig into these projects and get the issues taken care of. The office conference room is a place to do that sort of thing. We can schedule time for that. So you have to have minutes of that meeting. And because the civil code calls it an open meeting, chances are you have to have minutes. But the minutes might be because you're not really making any decisions. You're just planning for the future. there might just be a simple paragraph that says the board met to discuss the maintenance of the community and make plans for the future, and no decisions were made. And then I do recommend, if you do have a board retreat, after the retreat's over, at the very next board meeting, you take those items that you decided, you made some decisions on how you want to do business, and you list them out and announce them at their open session meeting so it gets entered in those minutes. So now we've made the decision at a meeting where homeowners were welcome to attend, and it gets done. You don't want to have secret meetings. That just doesn't work. Too many associations ask me the question, can I have an executive session for this or for that? And the answer is typically no, you cannot. There's only 3 things, they call it 4, but I've narrowed it down to 3, where you can have an executive session. The first one is legal issues. If you're going to go into litigation, you're going to talk legal issues with your attorney or among yourselves or with your management, that it requires an executive session. It's really important when you're talking legal issues that you're alone in the room, that only those people involved in the legal issue are in that room. The other one is negotiation of contracts. Now that doesn't mean if you're going to evaluate the contractor that you should go into executive session. That's not what it talks about. It says negotiation or the formation of a contract. The reason that's allowed to be an executive session is so that you can have a discussion about the good and bad points of this contractor and the good and bad points about this contractor and which one should we choose and how much money are they charging, and you're not going to get caught up in this slander or this libel situation, anything like that. And homeowners don't have a chance to come back and say, oh, you're going to charge $100? My brother-in-law will do it for $5 less. You know, and we've all seen that at time to time. So having a private session for the formation of a contract, for negotiation of a contract, is legal. You're going to evaluate that contractor because he's done a lousy job, you ought to have it in open session. That's what the law calls for. Now, the other item you can do in executive session is what they call private matters or personnel matters. And so, okay, chastising the contractor for doing poor performance might be a personnel kind of an issue. I don't think the law sees it that way, quite frankly. But if your homeowner's late with their payments and you want to talk about a disciplinary action to your homeowner for a violation of some kind or late with their payments or whatever, that is a personal item, and that you can take into executive session. You have employees, your association, any negotiation with your employee can be an executive session if you're talking about their personal life, their pay, and that sort of thing. So those are the only items. You want to talk about the budget? Budget, open meeting, every time. You want to go over and review the reserve study? Open meeting, every time. There's not a whole lot else you can talk about. There's nothing else you can talk about outside those 3 items. Legal, formation of a contract, and private personal matters. Those are the 3 things you can take into executive session. Nothing else fits in that box. His comment involves that insurance clause we talked about, or the contract itself. His recommendation is that everyone make sure that your contract has that hold harmless clause that holds the association harmless for the acts of him and his contractors. That's a case where all the clauses in the contract ought to be reviewed by the attorney to make sure they're balanced. Because obviously, if he makes a mistake, you want him held liable. If you make a mistake, the association causes a problem, he's going to want you held liable for that. Good attorneys make that work and make it fit so it fits well. Your job as a board member is to make sure that all fits in place. Now, you may not be contract negotiators. You may not be lawyers where you can look at these contracts and identify all the problems. That's why you have a counsel that you can go to. You have that attorney that you can go to. You have your manager you can speak to. The manager may be on some contracts very able to look at your contract. And then they may see something and decide, whoops, this needs to go to the attorney. Or maybe it's simple enough they can say, yep, I've reviewed the contract, it's much like the other one, and your manager can take care of it for you. But you need to have someone look at it, and certainly if you have somebody on your team that can look at it, all the better. You have an open session, you have what's called the closed session or the executive session. Do both of them require to have minutes? That depends on what attorney you talk to. I can tell you that my recommendation is if you're making decisions in a meeting, you need to have minutes for that. If you're simply discussing an issue, I don't know that minutes are all that required for that meeting, because the law says after you leave that executive session, you're going to go into the next open session, be it a week or a month or 3 months down the line, and you're going to announce the fact that you had that meeting and generally disclose what you talked about. So let's assume for the sake of conversation, you have a legal issue going on. You're going to sue a homeowner for some violation that they had. And You go in there and you discuss the ramifications of this lawsuit. You don't make any decision to do anything. It's no big deal. We have our discussion. Now we're all on the same page. You walk out of that meeting. At the next open session, you come back to your homeowners and you say, by the way, we held an executive session last week, and it was involving the violations of a homeowner and the lawsuit pertaining thereto. That's all you have to say. And that covers you as far as having minutes for that session. If, in fact, you make a decision, we're going to sue this guy, we're taking him to court to the highest land, and all that's decided, you may have to also announce that in your meeting. But in that case, you might want to have some auxiliary notes from that meeting that identify the whys and wherefores that you made that decision, so that should it ever come to pass, you've got some notes on it. Many times your attorney will do that for you.
But be very, very careful, because minutes are discoverable. So if the issue you're talking about in an executive session does lead to litigation, then everything that you put in those minutes is discoverable, and there's nothing more troubling than being deposed and having your words repeated back to you from the opposing counsel. So generally note those topics, but really don't expand on them. Those sensitive issues, enforcement matters, etc. Because sometimes, as it turns out, the facts may not always be 100% there. So just generally note them. Do exactly like the law requires. Don't get into any type of transcripts or anything else. Don't let, whatever you do, don't let your personal feelings be known that this person, because of their repeated violations and the disturbance they cause the community and all these different things, led to this meeting. Because that will all be discoverable.
So, do you take minutes? That depends. In open session, you always take minutes. The law did change effective 2 days ago that now on executive session, you must post notice 2 days in advance. And what most associations are doing is holding their executive sessions right after a regular board meeting or right before a regular board meeting. So as part of the 4-day notice you put to the regular meeting, you have a little note down there that says the board's going to meet in executive session and you've complied with it. It does require now that the agenda of the executive session be posted. That means that you've got to say, we're going to talk about delinquencies, we're going to talk about negotiation of a contract, or we're going to talk about personnel matters. Generally noted, the agenda is really critical because some managers, rightfully so, were detailing on the agenda the topics of discussion for the executive session so the board knew what they were going to talk about. That's pretty important. Now the law says you got to post the agenda. You don't post that agenda. You post the agenda of topics, which is litigation. Excuse me. If the litigation is a known topic, we're going to litigation regarding the roof repair that didn't get done properly. You might be able to say, litigation regarding roof repair. There's nothing wrong with that. When you start talking about things that are of a private nature, you just don't want to discuss them. And you don't want to post them in your agenda either. So minutes are taken of all regular meetings. Notice is posted 4 days in advance on all regular meetings, 2 days in advance on all executive session meetings. And if you're holding executive session tied with a regular meeting, put it all in the same notice. That's not a problem. If you're going to have an executive session unknown to the people beforehand, you better plan it a couple days out. If you're going to have an executive session for an urgent item, it might be better classified as an emergency board meeting. So, because in an emergency, the pool pump just failed, we've got to spend $1,000 getting it fixed, and we don't have authority to spend $1,000 without a board meeting, so we're going to have a special emergency board meeting, get the decision to spend the money, and then you qualify that at the next open board meeting that we had this special meeting and made this decision. The law requires that meeting notices be, quote unquote, posted. And so you should have a place in the open area of the community where you post all your notices. We had a community one time that had the in-house TV channel, and they had a bulletin board on there for community association things. That was the community's bulletin board. That didn't qualify according to the attorneys. We posted our meeting notices on there that did not qualify. You had to have a bulletin board someplace that qualified for that because they want the notice posted. Now that's going to change as time goes forward. Right now, today, one of your homeowners could give you notice and identify to you, the board, they want to have you notify them personally of every board meeting, and guess what? The law says you must send them a notice in the mail. Holy smokes. It's getting bad, but that's the way it is. Okay, accept it, and then have a plan in place for that. I know of some communities that they actually do everything by email to all their homeowners, and they encourage all their homeowners. Coincidentally, this is a homeowner association where they're pretty much mobile all the time, so most of them are computer-oriented and have their computers in place, and it works very well for them. You see an email come across, the board's about to have a board meeting, here's the topics of discussion, and that's how they post it, but they also post one on the bulletin board in the clubhouse, because the law requires they do that. And does an email constitute posting? No, it does not. You got to post it someplace. That's what the law says. And the other alternative would be to actually mail it to all your homeowners. Now understand, when I say mail it, remember that the law also says that as a homeowner, I can opt out of the U.S. mail and opt into email. So where I'm going to mail the document to all homeowners, and those homeowners who've opted for email, yes, then it qualifies for the mailing portion of it. So the choice is you mail it to everybody or you post it. If you have a newsletter that goes out to all owners, that qualifies. Why the TV bulletin board doesn't qualify, I don't know. It just didn't qualify that year. It may be down the road it will. It may be down the road that you could post it on your website, and that'll be a requirement. People will have to know that's how it's posted. Today, that's not the case. An emergency meeting requires no notice. You could call that meeting for right now. We have an emergency. We have to solve this problem. Emergency. Do it right now. You better have good backup that it was, in fact, an emergency, an urgent item that could not have been foreseen that needs immediate action. If it can delay for 2 or 3 days, then you ought to post notice and have a regular meeting. The question was emergency action, and that is action without a meeting. Can you do that process we used to do all the time? Was kind of fun. Get business taken care of between meetings, send a few emails back and forth, and have a unanimous written consent that we all agree to get this project taken care of, and you got it done between meetings. The law now says that's out. You can't do that anymore except in the case of an emergency. If you have an emergency, your board members are traveling all over the country, you email out to all the board members, here's the emergency we're going to take care of, what's your response? If your board has agreed to this, and I recommend a resolution of agreement right up front, say in your first meeting after the annual meeting, make that part of the organizational meeting. Here's our officers we elected, and by the way, we all agreed we're going to allow for email transmission of emergency action items. And that way, you can email your board members, we're going to have an emergency meeting by email because we have this specific problem to take care of here, and then take care of the problem. That only requires the majority of a quorum. So to get answers back, you have 5 board members, you blast out to all 5 board members that I've got this emergency to take care of. 3 board members respond. Now you've got a quorum. 2 of them say yes, it's a deal. You can do it. It's majority of a quorum on the new law. It's kind of complex. It used to be that you had to have unanimous written consent. We still recommend that. We would rather, when you have something come up, you're going to transmit this by way of written communication, get unanimous written consent. But the emergency situation is such that it's got to be taken care of, and one of my board members is on a cruise ship, has no access to email. How am I going to get that person to comply? I think the law saw that, so they said, look, you plan it properly, make a provision where you can do this kind of email communication on an emergency, and then majority of a quorum will make that a valid transaction. And yes, you always want to announce it after the fact. You can't do routine business by unanimous written consent anymore. You have to qualify it as an emergency to take action outside of a board meeting. Video conferencing is permissible. The law says for electronic meetings, that is to say telephonic meetings or other types of electronic meetings, that everyone must be able to see and hear each other to constitute your being in the room. You're present in the room if you can hear everything going on in the room. So if it's webcam and you're doing video conferencing, as long as the audio is there, that qualifies. His question was, if I have a 5-member board, 3 members show up, I have a quorum so I can hold a duly constituted meeting, and a vote comes to pass and 2 members say yes and 1 says no, have I got a qualified vote? The answer is yes, you do. That's the majority of a quorum. And that's the requirement. Yep. To get a quorum is pretty specific, and some documents identify what constitutes a quorum. In a board meeting, it's pretty typical. You must have a majority of board members. So if you have a 5-member board, you have to have 3 as a quorum. If you have a 7-member board, you have to have 4 as a quorum. Okay, to meet the quorum requirements, to hold a duly constituted meeting. If you don't get the 4 people there for 7 or the 3 people for 5, you haven't got a duly constituted meeting, and you should not conduct business even though you have an audience before you. You simply can't do it legally. his example was you've got this true emergency, a flood occurring now that's damaging multiple units. The board member is made aware of it. He goes to call the other board members. No one else is available. They're all off on a cruise someplace. They're out having breakfast. They didn't take their cell phone with them. Whatever the excuse is, he cannot get to them. What do? Shouldn't he have the authority to go ahead and just call the company in, the restoration company, and get the process at least mitigated? Absolutely. In fact, you'll find in our contract, you've authorized us to make that decision for you. If you come to us with a flood and it's flooding, my manager sees that flood going on, he is duly authorized by you to take immediate action to mitigate the damage as best he can. And then get with the board members and take the next step if we can. So now, but the board didn't actually duly authorize this board member to do that. Our contractor authorizes management. Maybe management's not involved because they're not available for some reason. Now the board member's on his own. Here's the solution to that one. At your organizational meeting, and again, planning meetings are so beneficial. Plan for that eventuality. With the new law in place that says we can't do this email unanimous written consent for routine items anymore, how's the routine item going to get taken care of? You delegate that responsibility to a team. I highly recommend that you set up a system in your community where 2 board members constitute an executive session, and they can meet with management anytime they'd like, and the board authorizes these 2 board members in cooperation with management to make any decision they want to make up to a high limit. Many, many thousands of dollars. So that now the problem comes to pass, I've got a team who can take care of it, and the rest of you board members can have a nice vacation. And maybe it'll be any 2 board members meet with management. However you form that resolution, so you've now duly authorized this team of people to make decisions on behalf of the board for these circumstances, with the clause in there that says they will report back to the board at the next open meeting of the actions they've taken, so it gets duly placed in the minutes, etc. Can the board authorize a single person, a board member, the authority to spend a limited amount of money, albeit a large amount of money, on an emergency without having to call anybody else? And the answer is you certainly can. In fact, because of the way the laws are coming down, and you cannot conduct business outside of a board meeting, you need a clause like that. And you take that board member who lives on site, who's always around, who's willing to take care of things and has good judgment, and the board decides as a board to appoint that person as the point person. If an emergency occurs between meetings and you become aware of it, you're authorized to spend up to X amount of dollars, and I'd make that dollar amount reasonable. Don't stop it at 500 or 1,000. Make it 5,000 or 10,000, depending on the kind of community you have and the kinds of emergencies you have come up, so that he can take action and get it done. I think that's really important. Okay, it is 11:59. I always try to start on time and end on time, but I'm willing to stick around longer for those that have more questions. I'm sorry, talk about